What is happening, super fans? You're listening to Behind the Mask, the show where we chat with your favorite superhero fiction authors about the worlds and heroes they are writing. Behind the Mask is brought to you in conjunction with the amazing folks over at superherofiction.com. I'm your host, Franklin Kendrick, and today on the show, I am pleased to be chatting with author and also fellow podcaster, Rob Edwards.
That's me. Hello. How are you doing?
Welcome. Doing good. How are you?
Yeah, great, thanks. It is midnight here, which is a little bit weird. So I'm slightly conscious that my wife's asleep in the other room. So just hoping I don't wake her up too much.
Yes. So I'll try not to be too excited either, just to not like.
Well, you're on the headphones. It's my voice. It's going to wake her up.
Perfect. So I guess I'll jump into the first question, which is when you're not behind the keyboard writing superhero fiction or whatever other genres you delve into, who are you? What is your secret identity in the real world?
Well, as it happens, no. I can't see a thing. I would take those off. Yeah, I am British, as you can possibly tell, but I actually live in Finland at the moment. Have done for the last 4 years. I used to be an IT trainer at a London hospital, so helping doctors and nurses understand how to order blood tests and all that kind of side of excitement. Moved to Finland just after I got married, and to be honest, been actively seeking employment ever since. Really, I've done a bit of kind of freelance writing and stuff like that for blog posts and the like. But mostly it's been trying to learn the language, which is not an easy language, and trying to find a job, really. So it's not been the most action-packed few years, but at least it's given me a chance to finish my writing. So that's why my novel finally got finished.
Oh, nice. It's like there's always like a little. I feel like the creative, like writerly type, whenever there's like a down moment, it's like normal people would be like, oh, what am I going to do? It's like for us, we just go, oh man, I can write something now.
It is. Well, I say I used to live in London, and now I live in they call it a city in Finland, but it's a tiny, tiny little place, and it's very, very quiet. After London, it just seems like there's nothing here. And it's a lovely place. I love it. I love living here, but it does mean that if I need peace and quiet to write, it's usually available.
That's awesome. So what specifically got you firstly into writing fiction, and then what steered you towards the superhero genre?
I was thinking because I've seen a few of the episodes of Behind the Mask, very enjoyable. And I've been thinking, I knew this question was coming. And there are sort of 3 or 4 sort of formative years type things that I could point to as to what got me here. I think it's not there's exaggeration to say one of those is actually comic books got me into writing. In as much as I saw mild-mannered Clark Kent as a reporter, and I thought I could be a writer.
Oh yeah.
And at school, I would went to the local paper and did a sort of a work experience week there, and went, no, I don't think that's really for me, to be honest. But writing, I love. And when I was 11, 10, a very long time ago now, there was a British-wide competition to write a short story for the birth of Prince William.
Oh, okay.
Second in line for the throne currently. And it was run by the Royal National Institute for the Blind. And I wrote a short story for it and was one of the 14 winners, essentially. So I got there to go down to London. We met the Princess of Wales and a number of British celebrities that I'm sure your listeners have probably never heard of, but Terry Wogan and Simon Groom, marvelous, and that kind of hit me. That was when the writing bug I think really first started with me. Going, oh right, yes, this is a thing. You can write something and real world things can happen from it. Because I've always written as a kid. I was written at school. I've always written and enjoyed writing. But it was sort of that really which went, oh, okay, this is something which can have a broader appeal than just I enjoyed writing to my notebook kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And it's such an accessible thing. I feel like you don't need very much to, like with most hobbies, there's a lot of requirements, but for writing, it's literally, like the most bare bones things, and then you just need your imagination.
Yeah. Which is, sometimes easy to come by and sometimes less so. But
So yeah, that's where the hard part comes in. If somebody runs out
it's
of
very
paint,
easy. You've just got to think of the right words. I mean, how difficult can that be?
yeah, if if a painter runs out of paint, they just go and buy more paint. You can't really go and buy more imagination on the spot.
No, sadly not. But
So
I do all right. I do okay,
yeah, turning the spotlight onto your, I kind of browsed a little bit of your work. I know that seems like you've done a lot of work in anthologies, but you have also have your first full-length superhero novel out that just came out on the 1st.
Yes, that's right. It's well, I mean, from me, it's been out for, well, I guess 48 hours and 5 minutes at time of recording. But so it's been out 2 days now, so I'm super excited about the whole thing. I started with the anthologies. Basically, a few friends of mine. Do you know the game HeroClix? Have you come across HeroClix?
Yes, definitely. Yes,
the miniature superhero game. There were 4 of us essentially who used to play together at sort of the British events for it, because we were all scattered around the UK at the time. And since then, we've all gone back to where we originally came from, or in my case, to new places. So Ricardo went back to Mexico, and Brent went back to the US, and then now he's living in Italy, bizarrely. And Stephen, who was originally in the UK but has now moved to the Bahamas. We're all over the place, essentially.
wow.
But one of the things, as well as playing HeroClix, that we enjoyed doing was we all enjoyed writing. And Ricardo said, well, can't we do something with that? Can't we actually produce some anthologies of our own? And we have, over the last sort of 5 or 6 years, we've sort of banded together, called ourselves Inklings Press, and have released, I think it's 9 books now, 9 anthologies. I actually joined the party slightly later than the other 3. The other 3 are the OGs of that team. I came along a little bit later, but I've had a story in everything since book 3, I think. And we sort of rotated the genres. So we've had science fiction one, a science fantasy, a couple of alternate history anthologies. We've just actually, like 2 weeks before my novel came out, I'm very confused about what book I'm promoting, actually. We had a pirate anthology come out called Tales from the Pirate's Cove, which,
Cool.
we do the whole thing. We invite people to sub for it, and we've moved to the point where we can pay people for the stories they submit, and we make a thing of it. And so that's where a lot of my sort of writing energies went for the last sort of 5 or 6 years when I wasn't working on my novel, because that has been kind of something which had been going in the background for a while now, at least until I moved to Finland. I forgot what the question was.
It was kind of broad, but on my part, but well, I'll say the name of the book to start. I'll be more pointed. Tell us, give us an intro of your superhero novel, The Ascension Machine.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
The Ascension Machine, yes, just come out 2 days ago. It's, as we said, it started life as a NaNoWriMo project 5 years ago. So I wrote the first 40,000 words of it during that month. Failed on that monthly project, but I really liked the story that I'd written, and I developed it more, and spent another 2 or 3 years in my spare moments hacking away at it and actually making it readable, because what you write in Nano is very, very, very rarely actually a good story. I wanted to write something for that, something I knew that I knew a lot about, essentially. And I've been consuming superhero media since 1978-ish. I can't think of the many months where I haven't read at least one comic book since then, essentially. So it really is in my blood. So that was something I knew I could write a lot about. And as I developed it, it became obvious that the story that I was trying to tell with it was one which was about identity, because obviously secret identity is kind of baked into the whole kind of superhero genre. But I had an idea that I wanted to set it at a superhero college, because it was also the sort of time when, a lot of people, when they first go to college, that's who they discover who they're going to be as adults, who they are actually going to be, who their identity is going to be. And I love this idea that, these are people who have gone to college because they want to be a superhero, but they haven't really found out what sort of superhero they're going to be yet, what sort of thing that they're going to be. The ethos of the Justice Academy, as it's called in the setting, is that, no matter who you are, no matter what you do, somewhere in the big wide galaxy at the large, there is a place for you to be the hero.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is about, encouraging people find out who they're going to be, and finding a place for them where they can be a hero. And then I throw into the mix my main protagonist, who is completely lying about who he is, because he is a con artist and grifter, a 17-year-old con artist and grifter. But so it's all sort of jumbled on top of each other, this question of identity and who you really are. And my original I got excited, sorry. But my original title for the book was So You Want to Be a Space Alien Superhero.
Okay.
I changed that for several reasons. But that ethos is still there at the heart of the book, essentially. It's all about, do you want to be a superhero, and what can that actually be? What can your path be to it?
So in your superhero world, since your main character is sort of an imposter, does everybody, how do you have powers? How do you find out that you have abilities? Because does everybody eventually find out they have something, or is it only certain people?
No, well, the college basically. Oh, I love talking about it, but it does sound silly every time I say it. But essentially, there are kind of three factions essentially at the college. There are the people who have innate superpowers. There are the people who have technology granting them their abilities to fight crime or rescue people or whatever it is they're going to be superheroing as. And then there are the characters who are just getting by on their wits and skills. So there's the powers, tech, and skills are the three groups within the college, and the protagonist very much falls into the skills group. I mean, he's spending his entire time not just faking it through his lessons, but faking it through his free time as well. His entire life is a lie, but he suddenly kind of realizes that actually he kind of really wants this. He didn't expect to. He didn't really intend to even be there. But now he's there, suddenly he's finding actually, he's making friends, he's finding a place. So it's about found family as well.
That's awesome. That's a good theme. I feel like for the superhero genre, because the characters can be so different from each other, and it's obvious in like the different abilities, but the also personality. It's a little more like heightened, like coming of age, no matter what. Because I've talked to people on the podcast where their characters are elderly and they're still like figuring out who they are, who they want to be. So it's a genre that lends itself so nicely to that kind of theme.
No, absolutely.
So what about this imposter who ends up needing to live up to what he's been passing himself off as? Can you give us sort of a profile of who this hero, and if there are other ones that are prominent in the story, who are they?
Yeah, basically, he finds a friend group. So it is, it ends up being a superhero team, essentially. The big sort of Act 3 finale action sequence is a superhero team, essentially, or a superhero in training team. But our protagonist is, well, we actually never learn his real name
Okay.
in the book. He does this gimmick early on of when he's talking to people, just picking a name at random and saying that's what his name is. Usually, so in the very first time we meet him, he calls himself Mark because he's talking to a guy he views as a mark for a scheme that he's trying to run, for example. So he just throws out names whenever he likes. He basically from that he gets chased around the space station for a bit. Evades the people who are looking for him, but actually stumbles into one of the other people who'd been in the bar at the time. And he says, look, I need someone to cover for me. I need someone who can pretend to be me while I go off in this direction, and while the people who are looking for me are looking at you. And so our hero says, okay, well, our protagonist takes a bit of persuading, but eventually agrees to, okay, I will pretend to be you for a bit. And kind of accidentally ends up taking the flight that this other guy was originally supposed to be on, not really knowing where he's going. He wasn't actually intending to get on the flight, but that flight takes him to the Justice Academy, to the college, essentially. And so he is suddenly going, wow, look at all these superheroes, look at all these people who think they're superheroes, because he had no idea that superheroes are really a thing in this galaxy. So he's going, this is weird. I need to see this. And it's kind of that first thing that gets him trapped in there, because he then starts to like it there as well. But he calls himself Grey. Sorry, that was where I was going with this. Because the person he is pretending to be, his name is Mirabor Gravane. And the Grey is a kind of contraction of Gravane kind of thing. But it's also a little bit of, Grey as in nondescript, as in not quite what he's pretending to be, although he's not making a big deal of that. But he meets a load of people. He meets a load of people. He gets a friend group, most notably 734 is one of my favorite creations for this. 734 is, that's his nickname. His real name is 4 billion. I can't remember the rest of it, but he's got a really long foot because he's a member of a clone species. Essentially, they are clone warriors. They're about 7 feet tall, green forearms, and their main job in the galaxy is to be soldiers. That's what they're there for, and that's what their life is. But 734 is a mutant. The cloning process hasn't worked properly for him, and he is almost 2 inches too tall. And as a result, he's somewhat ostracized from his Bronson society, and that's why he's at the Justice Academy, because he's a mutant, because he's just 2 inches too tall, and also turns out to be psychic. But that's a whole other thing. And then there is who else have we got? We've got Gadget Dude, who is a short blue guy who talks in very clipped sentences. He's quite fun to write for, because I have to look at every sentence and go, how many words can I take out of that sentence and still have it make sense? So he'd never quite speak. The way he speaks isn't proper kind of real English sentences, but you can generally work out what he's saying. And then there's a winged guy, there's a lizard woman, there's the scientist girl whose name is Pilvi. She's another skills student. So there's a whole gang with them. Essentially, they get together early on in the book, and Grey spends most of his time lying to them, which is nice.
So is there anybody at the Academy that would know the original hero that he's pretending to be?
I mean, yes. Spoilers, really.
I don't want to spoil. But of course, my mind is like, that's a really good setup for some drama right there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the early on, the real kind of threat to Grey is there is one of the counselors at the college who is from the winged species known as the Polyphan, but she has the superpower that nobody can lie to her.
Okay.
So Grey gets into a conversation with her and sort of realizes that he's got to find a way to get out of this conversation without saying to her, I need to leave because I don't want to be lying, because I can't lie to you. And if I tell you the truth, it's all going to go horribly wrong. So he spends quite a lot of time avoiding her in the early days. But she's not I mean, he kind of deals with that. It's later on when things get more difficult, particularly when Mirabel Gravaine's mother phones the college to see how her son's getting.
Oh boy.
But I'm not going to give any more details about that. But he does a lot of tap dancing with his lies, essentially.
Sounds great. So what about villains? Are there any crazy super villains or is there a single super villain for this particular book?
There is a supervillain. Mostly this is that's kind of far enough into the story. I don't really want to say very much about it because early on it really is it's about finding his feet. It's about finding who he is and how he's the problem that Gray is facing is the fact that he is lying about everything and he's dealing with that. But the situation just keeps escalating and he ends up having to deal with mobsters, and then eventually, yes, there is a supervillain that has to be faced at the end. But I'd rather not talk about that. But he is there.
The cloak of mystery.
Oh, what? Yes, absolutely.
So what about the world for these characters? Can you give us sort of like a tour of what sort of world they are living in? I know there's space travel.
Yeah, I mean it's an old galaxy. It is a very lived-in space. There are I mean, Gray says dozens of different alien species. I don't name them all in the book, but there are dozens of species who cohabit within this galaxy, and obviously some worlds are more predominantly one race, and some are another species, and so forth. But generally, it's a bit of a melting pot galaxy, essentially, and there are worlds which are vastly populated and millions and millions and billions of people in them, and then there are also thousands of worlds where they've only really got enough colonists to populate one town in it, and so there's a fair mix of different locations, but we don't see very much of that because of well, there's one other thing to know about Gray. He has spent the last 10 years living in space stations, going from one to another, basically seeing the galaxy. He sees it as seeing the galaxy, looking out at different worlds through view screens and going, wow, look at that world. I've never been there. Look at that place. Isn't it amazing? And he hasn't left the indoors of a space station for 10 years. And when he gets to the Justice Academy, when he gets to the college, he discovers that he has, it's a variation on agoraphobia, basically. He does not deal well with there being no roof. If there's no ceiling, he gets a little bit stressed. I mean, it's not quite crippling, but every now and then, when the situation gets stressful, he really just can't deal with the fact that, gravity, is that really enough to keep my feet on the ground? If I do drift away, what's to stop me going everywhere? I mean, he doesn't like being outside. So we don't see a lot of outside in book one. We do visit a couple of different places, but we don't see very much of the galaxy at large. Gray is very much about space stations. He could tell you everything about every space station he's ever been to. He likes the fact they're all yellowy brown in color on the inside.
So do you have like a master spreadsheet or some sort of way that you've sort of built up all of the various lore for your superhero world?
I mean, a little bit. I've got notes in Scrivener because that's where I was doing most of my writing for the first version. Some of that is now on my website. I've had a little sort of a Galaxy Gazetteer that I published on my website. So if people are interested in what the world looks like and the sort of things which goes on there, they can go visit that. And so I've made a few notes, and it's come, and I'm working on the sequel now already. So it is all sort of coming together. And I wrote a couple of short stories, or actually I never actually finished them. I wrote a couple of half short stories about some background stuff for like 734 and his species, and a little bit more about Pilvi's homeworld as well. They probably, I mean, will eventually, I guess, probably see the light of day, but currently not in a state I'm willing to show it to people.
There's always going to be probably a small handful of stuff like that for every
Yeah,
writer. Where
yeah,
it's
yeah,
like,
yeah. Of course.
this is a work in progress.
I've
That's
got
all you're
a,
gonna.
I've got a work in progress that started in 1999.
Oh, jeez.
About the London Underground and demons stalking the London Underground, and I swear that it's going to be finished someday. But it's been 21 years, and there's no sign of it yet.
I just recently, this is such an anecdote, but I have to bring it up because talking about things for years that are unfinished. I had spiral notebooks up until probably January that I had kept for years, and they were in a bucket. And I finally decided to go through it because it was overflowing. And I decided, I'm going to scan all of these because I keep dragging this bucket of handwritten things. And luckily, I chose to do it because some of them were so old. They were from like high school, and the pages were starting to turn see-through, and I could see both sides of the writing with the ballpoint pen. So like those, maybe someday now that they're scanned, I can like digitize them into a like handwriting conversion software and finally put them into typing.
Wow, that would be so weird.
But
I don't know when I moved to Finland, it really was a case of everything that I can't, the amount, the cost of shipping everything from the UK to Finland was a right. Let's be really strict about this. What can I take with me? Mm-hmm. What else can I send to my parents, despite the fact they're already complaining about my comic collection? What else can I get? So I the bare minimum came with me to Finland. So I'm afraid I don't have notebooks from when I was 12 anymore.
Oh boy. Well, for the comic books, considering the current state of publishing, I would say, please, parents, do not throw those away. We don't know when we're going to get more physical comic books, please.
Yeah. No, that's very true. Very true. Huh.
So sort of leapfrogging off of that, I know that you mentioned earlier that you grew up reading a lot of comics. What kind of things, if it's just comics, then cool, or whatever it is, but what sort of things inspired you to work on your superhero book?
I was, because I've done a couple of interviews with blogs and stuff over the last few days, what with the book just coming out and stuff, and so I've been thinking about this quite a bit. And actually, I'm not going to go my entire life story for this because that's not what you're asking. But my first comic book, bizarrely, was the second issue of the British reprint of Marvel's original Star Wars comics.
Oh, wow.
When the original Star Wars movie back in 77 or whatever, I don't think it actually got to the UK, certainly not to Grimsby where I grew up in 77, but the second issue of that magazine was the first comic book I got. And my dad, who was a long-term DC fan, went, no, these space comics, they're not, because Star Wars wasn't Star Wars then, you've got to think. These space comics are not really what it's about. I'm sure I can get you some proper American comics that I used to read when I was a kid. And a few weeks later, he turned up from, because they weren't terribly common back in the 70s in the northeast of England to find American comic books. But my dad did. He found an issue of Green Lantern 123, I think it was. And Justice League of America, I don't know the title. I don't know the number of that one because I couldn't find the cover for it, but I remember the Green Lantern one very clearly. And basically, this kind of combination of superheroes and space stories have been very much part of my DNA of everything since. I did. I don't know if I mentioned this when we were chatting before, but back around 2000, I wrote some adventures for Wizards of the Coast Star Wars role-playing campaign they used to run at conventions called Living Force.
Mhm.
So again, writing and Star Wars and science fiction and superheroes, it's all kind of it's all bumbled along throughout my entire life, really, of being all kind of interweaved together. And that's kind of why I've written a science fiction superhero book, I guess, at the end of the day. But, the influences, I love the Legion of Superheroes. The Legion of Superheroes from DC is my go-to book. Sometimes it's awful, because I've read it since the 70s. Some iterations of the Legion has been dreadful, but some of it has been absolutely magnificent. And whatever form the Legion takes, I'm even there for it when Michael Bendis is writing.
Poor Michael Bendis. He's had such an up and down.
Yeah, the current Legion book is a bit of a mess, but I'm still buying it, still reading it, still sort of enjoying it.
Yes.
But yeah, so that's kind of why I chose to write a superhero science fiction book, because of all of my history and everything I've ever read, really, essentially.
Mhm. I also have to ask, because most of the people that I've interviewed, as far as I know, come from the United States. You have sort of a different sort of viewpoint, where from where you grew up, comics weren't readily available, like right off the bat and all of
Yeah,
that.
I mean, it's different now. I am old and grey, essentially. It's actually quite funny. My debut novel, Ascension Machine, get the plug, go back in, came out 9 days before I turned 50. That wasn't an accident.
Wow.
I was determined to be a published novelist in my 40s, even if it was only by 9 days. Um, so uh, back when I was first getting into comics, what we had in the UK were lots of sort of UK comics. So we had 2000 AD with Judge Dredd and Rogue Trooper and all those kind of characters, and a lot of science fiction comic book type stuff. Never really got into it, actually. And things sort of more sort of proper kid-based ones like the Dandy and the Beano and stuff like that. But we also got a lot of reprints. Marvel UK in particular was big into doing reprints of really early Marvel stuff. So there was a monthly Fantastic Four digest reprint, which would have 2 or 3 issues of 60s Fantastic Four reprinted in black and white, which is what I would be reading and enjoying.
Mhm.
So I was, a lot of the time, even when I was reading in the mid 70s, I was already 10 years behind on what comic books were actually doing at the time. It was one of those strange things that, there used to be a market stall where they would get sort of up to date American comic books in it. And you'd go to the market and you'd pick up whatever they had. And, sometimes it would be an issue of Superman Family, and other times it would be an issue of Teen Titans, and you could never be entirely sure if the stories were going to be a multi-arc story. I could never be certain whether I was actually ever going to see the end of one of those, because it really depended on which the market vendor, whether they actually picked up those comic books that month or not. It wasn't until much later when I actually found a proper comic book store where I could actually get comic books on a regular basis and place an order and be sure that they would actually be coming my way. So yeah, it was actually quite difficult following comics when I was growing up in the 70s and early 80s UK. But against that, Captain Britain was excellent.
Absolutely. It's so weird that for entertainment, we've come such a long way
Yeah.
with accessibility. We're now, even like 10 years ago, I had a difficult time finding collections of like original Superman stuff.
Yeah.
But now, I'm very happy that everything has kind of gone digital, because it makes it so much more like affordable and accessible.
Yeah.
And even within the past like 2 years, like the Netflix of comics idea, it's like finally I can go to the beginning and read something, because like it or not, the mainstream superhero comics have such an influence on the superhero fiction genre for the indie world, I feel like. So to be able to go to actually access and consume it, it sort of feeds our inspiration and our like creativity, because we see what has been done beyond our small shelf of trade paperbacks like mine that I own.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, my comicsology account is groaning at the seams.
Oh
I've got a
yes.
lot of, and I do. I've got them collected books that I actually own. I think because they're at my parents' place, and I just fancied reading them, and they were, 79p for that single issue that I remembered reading, and they're actually the classic Teen Titans story, the Judas Contract, was
Oh
one of those
boy.
ones where when I was buying the comic books, the monthly comic books would come to would come to this market vendor that I would go to, but the annuals didn't. So when the Judas Contract Part 4, the finale, was in Teen Titans Annual, I
Mm-hmm.
didn't get to see it because it never made it. So it was literally, 30 years, I guess, after it was published that I finally read what happened at the end because
Wow.
of comicsology and was able to find that issue and read it basically. So yeah, I've
I
often
love
wondered what
that.
happened at the end, and now I know. The build-up was better than the finale.
And it speaks to the long interest, I guess, of some of these stories. Like they stick with us to the point where even if you're reading like an ongoing series, you can go and pick it right back up and be like, oh yeah, it's like
Mm.
I never left, basically.
Yeah, very true. Very true. I mean, there are certain characters and certain team books that, yeah, I can always go back to, always dip into, and just pick it up wherever it was. Absolutely.
So my next question for you, since this is only your first in the series,
Hmm.
you don't have to be specific. You can be general because it's probably spoilerific. But do you have a favorite plot thread or a twist that came to you over the course of writing your book that you are proud of?
Hmm. No, that's interesting. Well, I have a particular one which I am, but probably not quite for the reasons that you're asking. Um, there is the book is sort of split up into three acts, kind of roughly. Um, the first act is mostly about Grey and the Justice Academy. He then, for reasons I won't go into, ends up taking some of his friends to a world called Bantus, and then later on to another world called Nymanteles. And what Grey and his team have to do on Bantus is actually pretty much based on something that I did in character in a game of D&D.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
and so that was one of the things I wanted to get into this novel when I was writing it, because I knew that I was creating a character who was a grifter, and I knew that I'd done this thing in this D&D game years before, where I'd been playing a bit of a con artist as a character, and I'd been really chuffed with how I'd pulled off one particular con in game, and I really wanted that in the book. So yes, I'm very proud of Grey's scheme on the planet Bantus because it was my scheme in a D&D game that I played years earlier. So how's that? Is that an answer?
That's pretty good. That's a pretty good answer. And it's very like enticing to kind of want to go read the whole thing right now. See if I can figure out what
Well,
it
I think I'll find that's why I'm here. Yes,
was. So, well, I just had a question in my head that is not on my list that I'm. Give me 1 second.
please.
See if I can figure out. So, oh yes. So, since you worked on your book over a couple of years,
Hmm.
this is kind of like a writing process kind of question, because I've talked to people where they do like a book a month, which I'm amazed at. But for writing process wise, I mean, did you have the whole story in your head that you wanted to tell at the beginning when you started Nano, or How did you
Oh, not
do the
not when
book?
I started. No, no, it was by the end of that month. I'd kind of worked out what I wanted the first three books of this series to be.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, I hope book one does well enough that people are going to want a book two. I've started writing it because I want it, so that's enough for
Yes.
me, really. Um, but hopefully, my publisher likes it, thinks we're successful enough to want a second one as well. But I, I mean, there is the conceit whenever you have a character who's sort of starting year one of an education, that there is this kind of thing. Okay, well, obviously, then if it's a 3-year course, we're going to want a story in year two, and we're going to want a story in year three. I mean, okay, there's the Harry Potter thing, which was actually a kind of a bit of an albatross around my neck for a lot of the time writing, because I don't want to be a Harry Potter
Mhm.
thing. But at the same time, I do want to tell a story about a college for superheroes. And, I go, oh, there is a superhero sport in the book. And I'm going, oh, God, am I just doing Quidditch? Should I include it? Should I take it out? But no, I wanted it in there because, it made sense there would be something like that there. And, they
Mhm.
do play it in the book for a bit. It's not the main focus, but, there is something. Um, so, um, so yeah, I wanted there to be one book in year one book in year two, one book in year three. I know the sort of end of all three of the books. Whether there will be a fourth after that when Gray's graduated and is off doing his thing in the wider world, I don't know whether I've got a story for that yet. I suspect I'll probably get one by the time I get there. But right now, it's going to be a trilogy, is what I'm planning. And I knew what I wanted the overarching story to be, and there are things in book one, not like oh God, not like Thor in Age of Ultron going to that cave and going, I've had a vision about Infinity Stones, but
Yes.
there are seeds here or there, not big enough to really distract from the actual story of book one,
Mhm.
but there are seeds planted in book one that are going to pay off in books 2 and 3, certainly, yes.
Very cool.
And they're there because I needed them there.
That's like the good. I think that's um, one of the strengths. I mean, a lot of people talk about writing quickly and getting it
Oh, I
out
can't.
there, but
I can't. I just
sometimes
can't.
the long process of like at least taking like a good amount of time. I mean, it sort of gives you a better chance to figure out what you're going to do because planting those seeds, I will say from my own experience, when I tried to do something quick and rush it out, I always, like without fail, find something as I'm doing like book 2 or book 3 where I think, oh man, I should have put that in book 1
Yeah.
and it would have been set up. So really it's kind of nice that you had like sort of a luxury of like, oh, let's really figure out where I want to plant the seeds because I also love going back and I'm the type of reader that I pay attention when something is revealed and then I go back and I'm like, it really was it really was set up there. It's like it's such an intelligent sort of trick on the reader where, you didn't think that little tiny thing was important, but guess what?
Here's something to look out for in book one, a question which is not answered in book one. But in book one, there is a mention of a force field which has no reason to be there. There we
Okay.
go. There we go.
There we go. That's a hint.
See if you can work out what that's about. It's answered in book 2.
I love it. So, besides that hint, how so you kind of answered my questions about future installments. And I guess being a trilogy, there's nothing that says you can't continue on. But for readers of your uh, first book right now, I mean, what is your tentative plan? Are you expecting to have a book out per year, or how long do you think they'll have to wait for
That's my
cliffhangers?
ambition. That's my ambition. I'm by the time this one got launched, I'm 40,000 words into the first draft of the second book.
Okay.
At the speed I write, I'm hoping, I mean, particularly at the moment with no job, I'm hoping to get to the state of being able to edit by the end of the year. And then it just really becomes a case of, how quickly does my publisher want to turn this around, if he wants it at all. And if not, would I want to indie publish or self-publish it? I don't know. That's all a long way off. I've got to finish the damn thing first. Yeah, I mean, that's my goal. My goal is to try and get a book out a year for that. Because what does they say? No, nothing sells book one quite like book two.
It is true. I didn't believe it, honestly, but it is true, because you got to start at book one. So everybody will be like, oh, there's a book three out, and they immediately have to go and get book one, because the funny thing about our little niche fiction genre, which is hilarious that it's niche, considering like the wider world is like so thrilled by superheroes right now, is that there's no wikis out there of our stuff where someone could just go and be like, in 30 seconds, I skipped book 1 and 2, and now I can jump into book 3. It's like, no, you have to actually go and read the book 1 and start at book 1. And thankfully, these are readers, so they're not the type of people that are just like, I'm going to skip this and give me the cliff notes.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I as I say, well, as we've talked about, this is my first stab into, not actually quite strictly speaking, my first stab into the superhero writing genre. I do have a short story in the anthology "Somebody Save Me." I do have a short in that, yeah, this is my first step into this genre for publication. So I'm really quite interested to see how it goes, to see what it's. Because it is one of those things you sort of go, hey, it should be popular. People seem to like the movies. Why wouldn't they like the books? So yes. I'm hopeful. I mean, who knows? I'm hopeful. I'm hopefully find an audience. Actually, on the subject of movies, another thing I'm proud of in the book is it has an after credits scene. Which
nice.
This is something that one of my beta readers almost missed, actually. But I do my sort of afterward, thanks for reading this. I would like to thank my agent, my wife, and all that kind of stuff. And then there's a scene after that, which amused
cool.
Amused me a lot. So yes, there is look out for the after credit scene if you buy the book.
That's awesome. So actually, I have another question that's not on my list. It's just
Please,
I'm curious. So a lot of people I've talked to are indie published. How did you get what was the process of finding a publisher and all of that like?
Well, I mean, it's Shadow Dragon Press is kind of this one step up from indie, in as much as it is a publishing. It's got a series of books that it's published by a number of different authors, and it is. It's got a distribution deal and all the things you'd want from a publisher, but it's not Simon & Schuster by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
In actual fact, I mean, I'd sent out the Ascension machine to all the usual, agents and publishers, and hadn't really had much of a bite from it. But I participate in a Facebook group called the Science Fiction Roundtable. And that's got a lot of writers and readers and publishers and editors that dip in and out of there on a fairly regular basis. And I got to know a few people through, just hanging out there, really, just joining in the conversations that were going on in that group, essentially. And one of the guys who works for, or who runs Shadow Dragon Press, I should say, is someone I'd kind of got to know. So it was, it's all entirely, who you know, essentially. But I sent it to him.
Yeah, everything is.
Yeah. So, but I still, I know he's rejected books. So I know that he's picked my book because he had faith in it, he liked it, and he thought there was potential in it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it really was a case of having not been able to find an agent or publisher through the traditional means. It was just a case of I had formed a relationship with this guy through several years on this Facebook group, and I sent it to him and said, "Look, are you interested?" And he said yes, which was very exciting, as
That's awesome.
We can all imagine.
Yeah, because really, the big publishers, from everybody I've talked to, they just don't know how to market or what to do with the superhero genre when it comes to fiction, because it's not a visual medium the same way. It's totally a different type of entertainment for people.
And it is quite odd to see how many of the books on Amazon superhero list aren't terribly superheroic. I mean, I love some Doctor Who. I one of my, got a Dalek up there, I think. I do love some Doctor Who. My favorite TV show of all time, probably. But I wouldn't necessarily have thought that the two Doctor Who books, which are ahead of mine in the bestseller list of the superhero category, really should be there.
It's like, what is the qualifications, people?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can kind of see it, but yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's very vague right now. That's why I think there's the movement of the indie writers and also small press writers like yourself that have kind of come together and are trying to form a network to set down, because for readers it's kind of confusing if you don't know anything about the genre and you just stumble across it on Amazon. Then you're kind of like, what is this? There's like maybe 4 or 5 that look like superhero comic books with amazing covers, and your cover is also, I must say, really beautiful.
Thank you. It was a commission again by a chap I met through this Facebook group, a guy by the name of Ian Bristow. He's Canadian, and yeah, I love that cover. It was sort of I said to him, look, I'm looking for something which looks a bit like somewhere between a Star Wars movie poster and an X-Men cover, essentially.
Yeah, I love the X-Men vibes. It never fails. It's always cool to see, because you look at the characters as a group and immediately it gives you so many questions of who they are. Do they like each other? Is there somebody that hates the other ones but is forced to go along? Or were they roped in somehow? So I love that. But for the lists, I mean, really, and for the more authors I've talked to, there really is starting to evolve a set of standards. Like yeah, Doctor Who. I mean, I guess you could say loosely.
Yeah, I mean, I can see how you could get there, but I'm not sure I'd really necessarily, much as I love the show and I love the character and all the rest of it, I don't see him as a superhero, really.
Yeah, it's a long shot. But at the same time, with all the writers that I've spoken to, and there's plenty more that I haven't, it isn't restricting when everyone discusses kind of what makes your fiction into a superhero story. There's so many different flavors, and there's so many different characters and types of heroes you can tell. So really it's ripe for people to just jump in and start, basically.
At the end of the day, I'm not gatekeeping anything here. I just
I'm not either, because I'm totally, I'm the person who was like, you know what, I've read all those books on how to submit and how to do all this stuff. And it took me long enough to write my first superhero book that finally I was like, you know what, I'm just going to do this myself, because if I don't, I'll never do it and it will sit in a drawer. I
Yeah.
don't want that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that going back to Inklings we were talking about earlier on, that's I've been writing as a hobby for years. I've had my own podcast now for I think it's 9 years now that I've had my podcast, Storycast Rob, and I would sit down and read my latest short story to people, to the 4 people on the internet who'd found my podcast and wanted to hear me read a story to them, essentially. And I hadn't really thought about the idea of finding a publisher and all of this kind of seemed terribly intimidating or whatever. So it was really, I can't thank Ricardo, Brent, and Stephen enough for getting me on that ladder of, okay, I can get books, I can get stories out there. And when you sort of start seeing reviews come in and going, people are actually really liking this, and there is value in what I'm doing, because God knows that we all suffer from imposter syndrome at some point during the process, and I certainly have. To actually get to the point of saying, actually, yes, people are enjoying what I write. Let's actually go for this. Let's actually go for the novel. And I'm really excited to have got to this place, and I'm really happy with the way that the launch has gone so far. So, long may it continue, really.
Yes, and I will say the genre, the group of authors, of me specifically, like, welcome, thank you. You are now one of us.
One of us. Yeah. Okay. Great. No, that's fantastic. That's really good. And I was delighted to find that you were doing this, because I love being behind a microphone, and the chance to have a chat about my book and about writing in general and about superheroes. I was thrilled you were happy to have me along. So yeah, great stuff.
It's always interesting to me, because it's such a thing that we do for writing these stories, coming up with ideas. It's you're alone, and like, you can talk to your family about, like, I probably talk too much to my family about my stuff I'm working on, but they just kind of get like a glazed over look eventually, where it's like, yes, again, this is like, your 25th year of talking to us about stuff that you're always working on. But it's really nice to chat with other writers, and
so I mean, my little circle of Inklings Press guys has been fundamental, as I say, to getting me to where I am today. I couldn't have got here without them. Although, speaking of talking to family, let me just give you a quick sidebar, if you don't mind.
Sure.
As I said, my dad got me into comic books. He bought me that Green Lantern Justice League of America back in the day. He's also my first sort of go-to exposure to storytelling. He used to sit and make up stories for us when we were kids, and he's always had an idea that he wanted to write a little bit as well, and it's always been a thing of his. And when we started doing our books for Inklings Press, I said to him, "Look, Dad, you're never going to get a better chance of this. Write as a story. I'm not going to look at it, because I will give it to the others, and if they say they'll like it, then we'll publish it. Of course we will." And they did. They rejected his first story. Wasn't quite right for the anthology he was pitching for at the time. But we released a book called Tales from the Underground, which is an anthology of stories all themed about kind of underground spaces, one way or another. And my dad pitched a story called Grandad's Bunker to that, which the rest of the guys loved. And I am delighted that me and my dad both have short stories in that anthology, and that was a really, really exciting moment for us. So yeah, me and my dad, we can talk writing because we are both storytellers, and he's very supportive of what I do. and I've managed to con him into submitting a couple more stories to Inklings along the way. So we've been in, I think, 2 anthologies now. We've shared together.
That's awesome.
Yeah, no, I'm really pleased with that. Really happy with that.
Oh, it's like it's nice to have somebody that knows the struggle. It's like,
although let me be very clear. Sorry, let me make sure I give my mum credit as well.
oh yes, of course,
she was my editor on the short story that I did for the Prince William thing. That was taking us back full circle. All 600 words of it. She was there to make sure I spelled everything correctly because I was 11.
Yes.
But so she's been there at the start, and she's hugely supportive of what we do as well.
That's so cool. To the parents out there, thank you for being so.
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely.
So I'm coming to the end of my questions.
Sure.
So I guess before we tell everybody where to go find your stuff, is there anything that I haven't touched on that you want to put out there before we tell everybody, hey, go here?
I don't think so. I think I've low key managed to plug everything I wanted to plug along the way. Yeah, no, that's great. No, I've had a lot of fun. Yeah,
excellent. So give us the spiel. Where can readers go to find you and purchase your stuff?
Okay, well, The Ascension Machine is out now. It's been out for 2 days, as we said. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes & Noble. Sadly, not available in Finland, which is a bit of a disappointment.
Oh my gosh!
To me. So I can't see it on a bookshelf. But if anyone out there does see a copy of it on a bookshelf, anyway, take a photograph and send it to me. You can follow me on Twitter, of course, at StorycastRob. StorycastRob, one word. My podcast is storycastrob.co.uk, or you can search on iTunes or Spotify for Storycast Rob. I think that works as well. My author page on Facebook is facebook.com/ you guessed it, Storycast Rob. And I even think my Amazon author page may also be Storycast Rob as well. If I can't remember that one, but you can find me. I'm around. The name Rob Edwards is relatively common, which is why I've tried to find a label that I could use on social media, which could be more unique and myself. But if you want to listen to me reading new stories, then please do go visit Storycast Rob, the podcast. I've got I think 44 episodes now over the last. It's very irregular. It's when I remember to record something, which can sometimes be 3 years apart. But I've got 44 episodes of it out there. So if you want to listen to me it must be at least 22 hours, because the average length is about half an hour. So it must be coming on for 22 hours of stories if you want to listen to them. They're there. Wow. But otherwise, all the usual places, really.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you very much. I had an excellent time talking.
No, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you for inviting me.
You are very welcome. I'll do my little wrap-up spiel for all the listeners out there. So everybody listening, if you like the podcast, wherever you're listening, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Give us a like. Let us know what you think by commenting. The only thing I ask is that if you discuss spoilers, and it's very early days for the book.
Yes, that's true.
If you do discuss spoilers for the book, please especially leave a warning that there's spoilers so that people like me who love to read comments for whatever reason scroll through and avoid having their reading time be kind of like disrupted. So, yes, absolutely. But as always, everybody, just want to thank you all for tuning in. I appreciate you all, whether you're new or old to the podcast, and I will see you next time.
Cheers.